Welcome back to Deep Domain, the channel that dives past the crushed depth of history to find the stories of the silent service, the unseen battles, and the forgotten heroes who changed the world from the darkness. The submarine is the ultimate predator, a ghost of steel and shadows. But its primary weapon, the torpedo, is a weapon of brutal, unforgiving mathematics. A straight runner. The classic tin fish of the Second World War is a dumb weapon. It goes only where it's pointed. Firing one is a complex art of range, bearing, target speed, and gyro angle. A single miscalculation, a slight jink by the target, and the $10,000 weapon swims harmlessly into the empty black ocean, its launch a betrayal that screams your position to every enemy destroyer in the area. But what if the weapon itself, the one you trust with your life, is fundamentally broken? In the dark, early days of the Pacific War, this was the agonizing reality for the U.S. submarine fleet. Their primary weapon, the Mark 14 torpedo, was a catastrophic failure. It ran too deep, its magnetic influence detonator was a fantasy, and its contact detonator simply didn't work. It was a scandal, a secret kept by admirals who blamed their own crews rather than their faulty hardware. But one submariner, a man haunted by the sound of his own torpedoes thudding uselessly against enemy hulls, couldn't accept the official story. His superiors called him obsessed, mad, and forbade his tinkering. But in the cramped, oily confines of his torpedo room, he built an unauthorized, insane fix that would finally give the silent service its teeth. This is the mad submariner who built a torpedo that hunted its own targets. Before we flood the tubes, if you believe that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is the stubborn, innovative human mind, then I need you to join our crew. First, hit that subscribe button and make sure you ring the notification bell. It's your clearance for all our future patrols. Second, hit that like button. It tells the algorithms that these deep dive stories are what you want to see. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're hailing from. Our global flotilla is our greatest strength. The air inside the USS Gar, tail number SS-206, tasted of failure. It was a thick, metallic, recycled fog, a cocktail of battery acid, lukewarm diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, coppery tang of fear sweat. We had been at sea for 54 days, prowling the shipping lanes off Truk, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, and we had nothing to show for it but depth-charge scars, strained engines, and a crew on the ragged edge of exhaustion. I was Lieutenant Harlan Harry Croft, the torpedo and gunnery officer, and I was a failure. My job, my only job, was to make the fish run hot, straight, and true. They ran. They just didn't work. I was, in essence, the chief of a $100 a shot noisemaker delivery service, a service that did nothing but alert the entire Japanese Imperial Navy to our precise location. The incident that had broken us, the one that had turned our skipper, Commander Bulldog Rourke, from a hard-charging, aggressive hunter into a silent, grim-faced man of stone, had happened 3 weeks ago. It was a perfect night, a full moon, a calm sea, and a target sent from God, a 10 Urnarantan Maru, a fat, unescorted tanker chugging along at 8 knots, silhouetted against the moon like a target on a range. Rourke, a master of the periscope, had put us in a perfect 90-degree firing position, just 500 yards off her beam. He hadn't even had to use the targeting data computer, the TDC. It was a down-the-throat shot. Tubes 1 and 2, make ready. His voice had been a low, calm, predatory growl in the red-lit conning tower. In the torpedo room, my men, Gimp Malone and Styx Peterson, had already done their work, the fish prepped, the gyros spinning. I gave the final confirmation, my own voice steady, my heart hammering. Tubes 1 and 2, ready, sir. Fire 1, Rourke commanded. The Gar shuddered, a heavy, muffled thump and a whoosh of compressed air, as the first 300-pound torpedo was ejected. Fire 2, thump, whoosh, a second shudder. I started the stopwatch. Rourke was at the scope, tracking. Hot, straight, and normal. He breathed. Both fish. Look good. Beautiful wake. Angle on the bow is perfect. Stand by. The control room was dead silent. You could hear the creak of the hull, the low hum of the gyros. 75 seconds. I counted down, my eye on the stopwatch. 80. 81. Mark. The time for the first torpedo. We all tensed, and we heard it. A dull, hollow, metallic thud, a sound that traveled perfectly through the water and the steel hull of our own boat. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't the glorious, earth-shattering boom of 500 pounds of Torpex. It was the sound of a very expensive, very fast steel log hitting a wall. "Dud," the sonarman hissed, his face pale. Rourke was rigid at the scope. "Second fish. Impacting. Mark." Thud. Another one, even louder, even more final. 2 perfect hits, 0 detonations. On the Maru, we could hear the faint sound of alarm bells, of shouting. They hadn't even known we were there until we'd knocked on their door, twice. "God damn it," Rourke whispered, his voice a ragged, broken thing. "God damn these fish to hell." Then the night erupted, a flicker of light from the Maru's stern, a deck gun. A moment later, a whistle and a splash as a shell landed 100 yards off our port bow, and then, from the darkness behind the tanker, a place we hadn't seen, a new, fast-moving wake, a destroyer, an escort lurking in the tanker's shadow. The hunt was over. Our hunt, anyway. His was just beginning. The next 8 hours were a blur of screaming sonar, depth charges, and the terrifying, intimate, popping rivet sound of our hull compressing as Rourke took us deep, past the red line, into the crushing blackness. We were hammered. The ping, 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 ping of the active sonar was a nail being driven into my skull. The depth charges were worse, not just a boom, but a physical blow, a giant's fist slamming the hull, throwing men from their bunks, shattering light bulbs, opening seams. The air grew foul, thick with the stench of overloaded batteries and raw sewage from a cracked pipe. We survived. Just. Rourke, a miracle worker, had used a thermal layer to mask our escape, surfacing hours later, crippled, leaking, and defeated, with 2 destroyers still hunting our ghost. We limped home. And in that time, my obsession was born. I sat in the torpedo room, in the dark, staring at the 2 remaining torpedoes in our forward tubes. My babies, my failures. It wasn't the depth keeping. The wakes were perfect. It wasn't the magnetic influence fuse. We had disabled that thing long ago, per unofficial fleet-wide doctrine. It was the contact pistol, the Mark VI detonator. It had hit, twice, and it had failed. Why? When we got back to Pearl, I was a man on fire. While the rest of the crew went on a 2-week bender of whiskey and women in Honolulu, I went to the torpedo workshop. I filed my official report. 2 duds, hits confirmed by acoustics, recommend investigation. I got the standard reply from Buord, a condescending pat on the head, failures likely due to shallow running angle, improper maintenance, or crew error. Torpedoes are sound. Lies, all lies. I pulled the schematics, the Mark VI contact detonator. It was a beautiful, complex, precise piece of engineering. On impact, a small, propeller-like impeller on the nose of the torpedo would stop spinning, which would trip a series of levers, which would release a heavy, spring-loaded firing pin, which would then strike a percussion cap, which would ignite the booster, which would detonate the 500 pounds of Torpex. It was a Rube Goldberg machine of mechanical precision, and that, I realized, was the problem. It was too precise. It was designed by engineers in a lab, men who tested it by dropping it onto steel plates or by hitting it with a hammer. They hadn't tested it at 46 knots, striking a thin-skinned merchant ship's hull at a perfect 90-degree angle. I spent a week in the base machine shop, borrowing time, my hands, soft from my officer's life, becoming calloused and raw. I built a test rig, a heavy pendulum, a steel plate angled at 90 degrees, and I liberated a box of condemned Mark VI detonators from the scrap pile. I started smashing them. I painted the tips of the firing pins with dye just to see what was happening, and I found it, the failure, on a perfect 90-degree flat hit, the kind Rourke had given me, the kind that should have been a guaranteed kill. The firing pin was not striking the cap. It was crushing. The impact was so abrupt, the deceleration so instantaneous, that the complex, heavy steel pin mechanism would buckle or bend in its guide channel, milliseconds before it could travel its full required distance. It was too strong. It was too slow. It was a triumph of engineering, and a complete failure of physics. It needed to be lighter. It needed to be harder. It needed to be brittle. It needed to shatter on impact, to transfer its energy instantly, like a piece of glass, not bend like a piece of soft steel. I was mad, just as the title implies. I was obsessed. I was tinkering, as Commander Rourke would later call it. I started looking for a new material. Something light, something incredibly hard, something brittle. I found it. In the machine shop's tool crib, a high-speed tungsten carbide drill bit, the kind used for drilling through hardened armor plate. It was light, unbelievably hard, and if you hit it just right with a hammer, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was perfect. I spent the next 2 nights in secret, violating about a dozen articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I took a 1 to 4 inch carbide drill bit. I went to the grinding wheel, a shower of bright, hot, white sparks filling my tiny, hidden workshop. I carefully, painstakingly ground the drill bit down. I shaped it into a new, lighter, simpler firing pin, just a small, sharp, hardened steel and carbide dart. I then performed surgery. I took one of our live Mark 14s, one of the ones loaded in our forward tubes for our next patrol, and, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my tools, I disassembled the live-armed Mark 6 detonator. I pulled out the heavy, beautifully machined, useless Buord firing pin, and I replaced it with my ugly hand-ground carbide drill bit. It was a crazy wire trick without the wire. It was a mechanical heresy. I had just performed an unauthorized, untested, insane modification on a live, $10,000, 500-pound Torpex warhead. I had just turned my torpedo into a bomb that I prayed would actually explode. I did it to one, just one. Tube 4, my secret, my gamble. Harry, what in the hell are you doing in here? It's 300. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, a wrench still in my hand. Commander Rourke. He was standing in the torpedo room doorway, his face a mask of exhaustion and suspicion, drawn by the faint, illicit light of my work lamp. He looked past me. He saw the open inspection hatch on the Mark 14. He saw the tools. He saw the original, Buord firing pin sitting on a rag on the deck. His face went from suspicious to pale, to a deep, dark purple. Croft, he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. What did you do? What did you do? Commander Rourke's face, in the dim, red battle light of the torpedo room, was a storm front rolling in, a thunderhead of pure, undiluted fury. His eyes, which I had only ever seen as cold, calculating, and professional, were now wide with a mixture of disbelief and a new terrifying emotion. Fear. He wasn't just angry that I had broken a rule. He was terrified that I had just, with my hand-ground drill bit, created a 300-pound hair-trigger bomb that was now sitting 10 feet from the forward crew's quarters. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his very presence seeming to suck the air out. The smell of diesel and sweat suddenly replaced by the sharp, electric scent of his rage. Croft, he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous hiss that was far more frightening than a shout. Report, now. Tell me you didn't do what I think you did. Tell me you haven't just signed the death warrant for every man on this boat. He pointed a shaking finger at the open inspection hatch on the torpedo in Tube 4. Tell me that you did not just tamper with a live warhead. I stood there, the heavy, beautifully machined, useless Buord firing pin still on the rag at my feet, the wrench in my hand suddenly feeling like the murder weapon it might very well become. The lie, the excuse, the bureaucratic sidestep. It all died in my throat. I couldn't lie to him. Not about this. Not after what we had seen together through that periscope. I I fixed it, sir, I stammered, my voice a dry croak. The words sounded insane even to me. Fixed it? Rourke's voice cracked, a short, sharp bark of a laugh utterly devoid of humor. You fixed it? You, a lieutenant with a liberal arts degree and a 2-week course in torpedo maintenance, you fixed a Mark VI detonator that 100 PhDs at the Bureau of Ordnance have declared perfect? You know what you've done, son? You've unseated the safety mechanisms. You've altered the tolerances. You've introduced a piece of untested, unmilled, brittle metal into a high-impact detonation train. This thing, he gestured at the torpedo, could go off if we hit a heavy wave. It could detonate in the tube the moment I give the order to fire. The launch transient alone could set it off. It could. It could get stuck in the tube and cook off right here. You haven't fixed anything, Croft. You've planted a goddamn mine in the middle of my submarine. He was right. From a purely doctrinal engineering perspective, he was absolutely terrifyingly right. I was a madman. I had jeopardized the entire crew based on a theory, a pendulum, and a hand-ground piece of scrap metal. Sir, I pleaded, my desperation finding its voice. With all due respect, what you're saying is the book answer. But the book is wrong. I've seen it. You've seen it. I knelt down, my hands shaking, and picked up the original Buord firing pin. I then reached into my pocket and pulled out 3 others, the ones I had tested on my pendulum rig, their tips bent and deformed. Look, sir, I said, holding them out in my palm. These are the Buord pins. These are what happens on a direct 90-degree impact. The deceleration is too instantaneous. The pin is too heavy. The guide channel too long. It's basic physics, sir. Inertia. The pin buckles. It binds in the channel. It never reaches the percussion cap. It dents the target, but it doesn't detonate. It's a design flaw, a catastrophic one, that only appears at high speed, direct angle impacts. The very perfect shots we are trying to make. I then held up the small, ugly carbide dart I had made. This is the fix, sir. It's lighter. It has less inertia, less mass to resist the change in momentum, and it's brittle. It's made from tungsten carbide. It won't bend. On impact, it will transfer its kinetic energy almost instantaneously. It's designed to shatter, and in shattering it will drive a fragment of itself forward with enough force to strike the cap. It's not a pin. It's a projectile. It's a different principle. Rourke just stared at the pieces of metal in my hand, his face a mask of stone. He was listening, not just to me, but to the ghosts in his own head, the ghosts of the Maru, the ghosts of his own perfect, useless shots. You have no authority to do this, Croft, he said, his voice flat, the anger replaced by a deep, weary coldness. You know the penalty for this. It's not a reprimand. It's a court-martial. It's Leavenworth. For willful destruction of naval property and endangering a vessel. They'll crucify you. And what is the penalty for knowingly using a weapon that doesn't work, sir? I shot back, the adrenaline, the sheer righteous certainty of my discovery, finally burning through my fear. What's the penalty for sending men out to die, armed with lies? We're not just failing it, sir. We are actively betraying the men on this boat and every other boat in the Pacific. We are telling them they have a sword, when all they have is a dull piece of iron. We fire, we miss, we get counterattacked, and we die. That is the doctrining, sir, and it is insane. That is the madness, not this. I gestured to the torpedo. This is just a drill bit. A $5 drill bit that might, just might, save our lives. Is that crazier than continuing to do what we're doing? Is it crazier than watching another perfect shot go thud while a Japanese destroyer bears down on us? I had him. I could see it in his eyes. The conflict. The bulldog Rourke, the aggressive, by-the-book commander, was at war with the man who had stood at that periscope, who had heard those 2 dull thuds, who had then spent 8 hours in a cold, dark, crushing hell, listening to his boat cry, all because his weapons were garbage. Buord had insulted him. They had called his crew incompetent. He knew I was right. But to admit it, to sanction my act, was to end his own career. It was an impossible choice. He was silent for a full minute, The only sound the low hum of the ventilation and the gentle rhythmic creak of the hull. It was the longest minute of my life. I had laid my entire life, my entire career, on that deck, right next to the discarded firing pin. "Get out," he finally whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Sir? Get out," he repeated, his voice harder, not looking at me, but at the torpedo. "Go to your bunk. I did not see this. I was not here. This conversation never happened. This fix does not exist." My heart leaped. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't approval. It was something far more complex. It was a conspiracy. "But sir, the torpedo." "The torpedo in tube 4, he said, his voice like ice, "is a dud. Is that clear, Lieutenant? It has a faulty detonator. It is not to be fired under any circumstances. You will log it as such. If we engage a target, you will fire tubes 1, 2, and 3. You will fire our stern tubes. You will not ever fire tube 4. It is a dead fish. It is ballast. The only reason I am not having you arrested right now, the only reason I am not having that warhead jettisoned, is that to do so would require a report. A report which would admit that my torpedo officer has gone completely, certifiably insane, and has compromised a live weapon on my boat. And I will not write that report. Not yet." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes 2 chips of cold, hard granite. "We sail in 48 hours. You will not touch another torpedo. You will not speak of this to Malone, to Styx, to anyone. You will do your job, by the book, and you will pray to whatever God you believe in that we do not find ourselves in a situation where we need a 4th fish, because if we do, we're already dead. Now get out of my sight." I got out. I stumbled back to my tiny coffin-like stateroom, my body shaking with a mixture of terror and a wild, exhilarating triumph. I had survived. My secret was safe, but it was a terrible, heavy safety. Rourke hadn't approved. He had just contained the madness. He had put my insane invention in a box, locked it, and shoved it to the back of the shelf, hoping it would never have to be opened. The Gar went back to sea 2 days later, slipping out of Pearl Harbor in the pre-dawn darkness, a fresh coat of paint covering the scars from our last patrol, a new stock of perfect, useless, Buord-approved torpedoes in our racks, and in Tube 4, my monster slept. The Croft Special. The carbide dart, a single, hand-ground drill bit, sitting millimeters from a percussion cap that was wired to 500 pounds of high explosive. It was a secret I now shared with only one other man on the boat, the one man who could end my life with a single word. The next 30 days of the patrol were a new kind of hell, a quiet, tense, psychological war fought in the cramped, silent spaces of the conning tower. Commander Rourke was a different man. He was even more cautious, his aggression tempered by a new, deep, weary anxiety. Every time we went to battle stations, every time the sonar man called out a potential contact, I could feel his eyes on me. Was this it? Was this the moment he'd be forced to choose between the 3 torpedoes he knew wouldn't work and the one that might, or might just blow them all to hell? He avoided me. I avoided him. The claustrophobic 300-foot-long steel tube of the submarine, a place where privacy was a fantasy, suddenly felt like a vast, empty desert, with the 2 of us on opposite sides. The crew knew something was wrong. They could feel the tension, the unspoken animosity between the captain and the torpedo officer. They chalked it up to the failures of the last patrol, to the stress. They had no idea that the real source of the tension was a live, ticking time bomb, a piece of heretical engineering, sleeping silently in Tube 4. And as we pushed deeper and deeper into the heart of the Empire, into the most dangerous waters on the planet, I found myself praying for 2 completely contradictory things: that we would find the target of a lifetime, and that we would never, ever have to fire that goddamn torpedo. The Gar was a predator, but she was a wounded one, haunted by the ghosts of her own impotence. We stalked the shipping lanes of the Luzon Strait, a choke point so thick with Japanese traffic they called it Convoy College. It should have been a submariner's paradise, a target-rich environment. Instead, It was a special kind of torture. Commander Rourke, his aggression now tempered by a bitter, profound caution, was a master. He put us in perfect positions, time and time again. We'd slip inside the destroyer screens, our electric motors a whisper, the hull groaning under the thermal layers, our sonar man, Sonar Sullivan, calling out the propeller beats with a poet's precision. Captain, I have him. Maru, 800 tons. Range 2000. Bearing 030. He's beautiful. And Rourke would sigh, a sound of pure physical pain over the intercom. Target, too shallow. Risk of broach. Let him go. Or, target. Escort too close. We fire. They're on us in 30 seconds. He was hesitant. He was afraid. Afraid of the ping, ping, ping of the destroyers, yes. But more I knew. He was afraid of the thud. He was terrified of firing his 3 good torpedoes, his Buord-approved duds, and having them fail again, exposing us, naked and useless, to the inevitable, brutal counterattack. The Mark 14's failure hadn't just made the torpedoes useless. It had made our captain useless. It had broken his nerve. It had neutered the GAR. The crew felt it. The tension in the control room during a hunt was unbearable. It wasn't the sharp, exhilarating, predatory focus I had been trained for. It was a funereal gloom. We'd track a target, a fat, juicy tanker, for hours, only to watch Rourke let it slip away, citing a suboptimal firing solution. The crew, who had once revered Bulldog Rourke, were starting to mutter, "What the hell's wrong with the old man?" I heard Gimp Malone, my chief torpedo man, whisper to Sticks in the mess. We had that Maru dead to rights. Henderson would have taken that shot. I flinched. Henderson, the ghost of the last failed torpedo officer, the one Rourke had also blamed. Now I was the new Henderson, the new pariah, the one whose gear, whose calculations were suspect. The crew didn't know the real reason Rourke was hesitant. They didn't know about my carbide fix. They just knew the torpedoes weren't working, and the captain was scared. And they, in turn, were scared. We were a ghost ship, haunted by our own weapons, a crew of 80 men trapped in a steel tube, drifting through enemy waters, accomplishing nothing, just waiting for the inevitable, fatal mistake. And then, we found the Shokaku, or rather she found us. It was 400, on a black, moonless night, the sea a flat, oily calm. We were running on the surface, charging our batteries, the diesel engines a thunderous, comforting roar after the silent creep of the day. Sullivan, our sonar man, was a genius, a man who could hear a fish fart at 1,000 yards. His voice suddenly cut through the routine. "Captain, bridge, I have, fast screws, high-speed turbines, bearing 090. And they are loud, closing fast." Rourke was in the conning tower in an instant. "Alarm! Dive! Dive! Dive!" The klaxon horn blared, a sound that rips your nerves out by the roots. "Awooga! Awooga!" Men were running, shouting, hatches slamming. I was at my station, the torpedo data computer, my heart trying to escape my chest. The GAR angled down, the Christmas tree board lighting up with red to green as the hull openings were sealed. "Rig for deep submergence. Rig for silent running." "Captain!" Sullivan's voice was a high-pitched, terrified shriek over the intercom. It's a fleet, not 1, not 2. I hear 4, no, 5 destroyers, and something. Something big, Captain. Something huge. Oh, in the middle. The screw beats. I've never heard anything like it. It's a carrier. A carrier. The ultimate prize. The Shokaku herself, one of the queens of the Japanese fleet, one of the carriers that had hit Pearl Harbor, was out there, in the dark, surrounded by a wall of steel, and we had just, with our loud, thundering diesels, driven right into her path. We were no longer the hunters. We were the prey. "Passing 100 feet. Johnson, the dive officer, called out, his voice a monotone of forced calm. "Silent running. All stop. Rig for depth charge." The thrum of our own motors died, replaced by a deafening, cold, creaking silence. And into that silence came the sound. Ping, 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 ping. The active, searching, hunting sonar of 5 Japanese destroyers. They were above us. They were everywhere. "Captain," Sullivan whispered, his voice trembling. "They have us. They're bracketing us. 2, 3, 4 of them. They're right on top of us." We sat in the dark, 300 feet down, the air in the GAR already thick, hot, and tasting of raw fear. The pinging was a physical assault, a metallic hammer blow on the hull, a sound that told you, "I see you. You are going to die." And then, the first one. It wasn't the distant crump of a failed attack. It was the crack boom of a depth charge detonating right outside the hull. The GAR was thrown sideways, as if by a giant fist. Every light bulb on the boat vaporized instantly, plunging us into pitch blackness, lit only by the dim, red glow of the battle lanterns. A pipe burst in the engine room, a high-pressure scream of steam and men shouting in agony. Cork insulation flew off the hull like shrapnel. It was not a shake. It was a beating. Boom. Another one. Closer. The deck heaved, throwing me to the floor. Glass from the dial gauges shattered, raining down. "Control room," Rourke roared, his voice a bellow of pure fury and command. "Damage report, now." The next 2 hours were a nightmare. They were methodical. They were professionals. They had us pinned, and they were not leaving until we were scrap. They boxed us in, dropping charges in a perfect, inescapable pattern. Boom, a pause. Boom, a pause. Boom. With each explosion, the GAR cried. She groaned. Her rivets popped, sounding like rifle shots inside. The hull. Water began to spray, in a fine, icy mist, from a dozen leaking seams. The air was foul, thick with the stink of chlorine gas, from the cracked battery casings. Men were puking, from fear, from the concussions. "Captain," Johnson's voice, strained. "Aft planes are unresponsive. Hydraulics are shot. We can't hold depth. We're at 400 feet. 410. She's not holding. We're sinking. Too much damage. Too many leaks. We're going to be crushed." A steel coffin in the blackness. "All ahead flank," Rourke roared. "Blow all main ballast. We're surfacing. We'll fight them on the surface." It was a suicide order. 1 submarine, its decks awash, against 5 destroyers with 5-inch guns. We were dead. But it was a faster death than the crush. The sound of the high-pressure air screaming into the ballast tanks was a banshee wail. The GAR shuddered, groaned, and her nose pitched up, violently. We were ascending, a crippled, leaking whale, rocketing towards the surface, right into the teeth of the wolf pack. "Stand by the deck gun," Rourke yelled. "Gunner's crew, prepare to." "Captain," Sullivan shrieked, his voice a sound of pure, insane impossibility. The carrier! It's right here. The destroyers are gone. They're behind us. We surfaced inside the screen." Rourke was at the periscope. His eye pressed to it even as the boat was rocketing upwards. We burst through the surface with a sound like a whale breaching, water cascading off the hull. Rourke spun the scope. His voice was a whisper of pure, unadulterated awe. "Oh my God. He's right. He's right. She's right there." He stepped back. "Harry." He looked at me, his eyes wide, manic, a new light in them. "The Shokaku, range, 800 yards. Angle on the bow, 0. She's right in front of us." I was frozen. 800 yards. A perfect shot. A carrier. The kill of the war. And Rourke's eyes. They were filled with a sudden, paralyzing terror. Not of the enemy. Of his torpedoes. He knew, at this range, at this angle, his Mark 14s would hit her, and they would go thud. He had 3 duds in the tubes. He was about to fail, in the biggest moment of his life. He looked at me, his face a mask of agony. "Croft," he whispered, "I have 3 duds. And I have whatever the hell you put in tube 4. My heart stopped. He remembered. In the middle of this apocalypse, he remembered my crime, my madness, my suicide pact. The choice was here, now. Tube 4. I breathed. She's untested, sir. But I think she'll work." Rourke stared at me for one long, agonizing second. The boat was wallowing in the swell. The destroyers were turning, their searchlights already probing the darkness, finding us. We had maybe 60 seconds. "Then it's a hell of a day to test it," Rourke growled. He leaped to the TDC. "Firing solution, tube 4, only tube 4. Bearing, 005. Range, 750. Speed, 10 knots. Angle on the bow, 010 port." I flew to the panel, my hands a blur, setting up the shot. Not a complex shot. It was a goddamn garage door. But it was the weapon. "Sir," I yelled, my voice cracking. My fix. It's acoustic. It won't hear the carrier's turbines. It only hears low frequency. It's for merchants." Rourke looked at me, his face a mask of black, furious despair. "Then we're dead. It won't work." "Wait!" Sullivan screamed from the sonar station. "The carrier. Her screws. She's damaged. One of the depth charges. It must have hit her. Her starboard screw is out of balance. I hear it. It's thumping. It's a low 200 hertz. Thump. She sounds just like a goddamn Maru." Rourke and I locked eyes. It was a sign. It was a miracle. My hound, my mad invention, had found its prey. "Tube 4 ready," I screamed. Rourke smiled, a terrible, wolfish grin. He grabbed the firing key. "To hell with Buord," he whispered. "And God bless your acoustic embrittlement. Harry," he yelled. "Fire 4. Thump hoosh." The gar shuddered, as my one, secret, illegal, carbide-tipped, acoustic homing monster leapt from its tube and began its hunt. The silence in the control room after the launch of Tube 4 was not a calm silence, but a terrified, buzzing void. Every man held his breath, every ear strained, not for the distant explosion we craved, but for the devastating, immediate detonation we also feared. Commander Rourke, his face a mask of grim determination, was at the periscope, tracking not the torpedo, but the Shokaku herself, a vast dark shape now clearly visible against the pre-dawn gloom, a behemoth of steel and aircraft, oblivious to the single, silent, carbide-tipped dart racing towards her. "Hot, straight, and normal," Rourke whispered, more to himself than to the crew. "Wake looks good. Depth holding." He was reciting the litany of a torpedo run, but his voice was tight, strained, tinged with a desperate, almost manic hope. I stood at the TDC, my hands clammy, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the second hand on the chronometer sweep around. It was all a gamble now, all of it. My insane detonator, my insane acoustic homing mechanism. Rourke's insane decision to fire it. The entire impossible situation of the gar bursting through the surface in the middle of a carrier screen, like a suicidal breaching whale. And then, from the sonar station, a gasp. "Captain, I have it. I have the torpedo. It's still running hot. And it's tracking. It's following the carrier's screw beats. It's homing." Sullivan's voice, usually so precise, was a high-pitched, incredulous shriek of pure joy and terror. My hound, my low-frequency acoustic homing fix, was working. It was latching onto the Shokaku's damaged, thumping propeller. It was hunting. The low, mechanical hum that only I could hear, The whisper of the tiny hand-wound clockwork motor, the faint tick-tick-tick of the servo motors in the torpedo's nose, was now a roaring, triumphant chorus in my mind. "Target range. 200 yards, Rourke yelled. "She's still oblivious. Sonar, report. Loud and clear, Captain. Torpedo's right on her stern. Bearing 005. It's going to hit. It's going to—" He never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment, the ocean itself exploded, not with a thud, not with a distant crump, but with a roaring, tearing, earth-shattering boom that ripped through the gar like a physical hand, throwing every man from his feet. The lights, which had only just flickered back to life, died instantly. We were plunged back into absolute darkness, now filled with the metallic shriek of rending steel and the terrified screams of 80 men. The gar bucked and recoiled as if struck by a giant hammer, her bow pitching up, then down, violently. I slammed into the bulkhead, my head ringing, my teeth rattling. The smell of ozone, of burnt wire, of raw, terrified human sweat filled the air. "What the hell was that?" someone screamed, his voice raw with panic. "Damage report! Damage report!" Rourke roared, his voice a strained, hoarse battle bellow through the chaos. "She hit! She hit!" Sullivan screamed, his voice a mad, hysterical laugh of pure, unadulterated triumph. "She hit, and she exploded. It was a good kill, a goddamn good kill." Through the ringing in my ears, through the darkness, I could hear it. Not just a single explosion, but a series of secondary, internal booms, muffled but heavy, coming from the direction of the Shokaku. And then, a sound that no man, not even in his wildest, most bloodthirsty dreams, ever thought he would hear from a torpedo. A high-pitched, tearing shriek of metal. The sound of a colossal ship, hundreds of feet long, being ripped apart from within. It was the sound of a carrier, a queen of the fleet, bleeding to death. "Captain!" Johnson, the dive officer, his voice hoarse with awe. "Sonar reports the carrier. She's taking on water fast. She's listing to starboard. Her stern is already going down." The red battle lanterns, powered by the emergency batteries, flickered back to life, casting long, dancing shadows of stunned, soot-covered faces. Rourke was at the periscope, his eye pressed to it. But he wasn't tracking us. He was tracking her. He was tracking the Shokaku, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was not the voice of the bulldog Rourke I knew. It was a voice of pure, incredulous, almost reverent awe. She's going down," he whispered, his voice catching. "Stern first. There are fires. Massive fires. On her flight deck, aircraft are sliding off. Her destroyers. They're in a panic. They're not looking for us. They're looking for her." He stepped back from the scope, his face smeared with grease and soot, but his eyes were burning with a light I had never seen before, a light of absolute, undeniable, triumphant vindication. He looked at me, at Harry Croft, the mad torpedo officer, and he smiled. A wide, terrible, glorious, wolfish grin that split his dirty face. "You did it, Croft," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You son of a bitch. You actually did it. You built a goddamn torpedo that works." The aftermath was a blur. The Japanese destroyers, consumed by the catastrophe of their sinking carrier, abandoned their hunt for us, their active sonar fading into the distance as they scrambled to rescue their men. Rourke, now a man possessed, took the crippled gar deep again, past the crush depth, past the breaking point, and used a thermal layer to finally escape. We limped home, the gar a wreck, leaking, groaning, scarred by depth charges, but triumphant. And in the torpedo room, Malone and Styx, my torpedomen, looked at me with a new, terrified respect. What did you do to that fish, Harry?" Malone whispered, his face pale. I just smiled, a secret, dangerous smile. I just made it work, Gimp. I just made it work." When we finally surfaced in Pearl Harbor a week later, crippled but victorious, the news had already reached us. The Shokaku, the pride of the Japanese fleet, had been sunk, not by a carrier strike, not by a surface battle, but by a single, perfectly aimed, and perfectly detonating torpedo, fired by a submarine. My torpedo, my mad invention. The official inquiry was swift, brutal, and ultimately a political sham. BUORD, the Bureau of Ordnance, sent their top brass. They interrogated Rourke. They interrogated me. They demanded to know why Tube 4 had been fired, against orders, against doctrine, against common sense. Rourke, the bulldog, covered for me like a father. He testified, under oath, that he had made a command decision, under duress, to fire a known faulty torpedo, hoping for a lucky hit. He had logged it as a dud, a faulty weapon. He stuck to the story. I stuck to the story. And then, the critical moment, they demanded the recovery of the faulty detonator from Tube 4. My heart stopped. My dirty little secret, my hand-ground drill bit, was about to be exposed. But Rourke, anticipating this, had already handled it. He told them, coldly, that the torpedo had obviously been recovered by the Japanese, or had sunk with the Shokaku, which was, after all, a massive explosion. He refused to provide any physical evidence of my tampering. They couldn't prove it, not officially. They couldn't prove the fix. But they also couldn't ignore the indisputable fact that a single submarine, with a single torpedo, had sunk a carrier. The admiral, a shrewd, pragmatic man who only cared about results, listened to the denials, looked at the sunken carrier, and made a decision. He issued a quiet, unofficial, almost invisible directive. It wasn't written down. It wasn't codified. It just went through the fleet, carried by whispers, by knowing glances, by the shared, frustrated rage of men who had been betrayed by their own weapons. The directive was simple. Torpedomen, make your own detonators. And that, my friends, is how the war for the U.S. submarine fleet changed forever. Not by a new weapon from the factories, not by a breakthrough in science, but by a simple, desperate, insane act of rebellion by one lieutenant, who couldn't stand the thought of sending his friends to die with a broken sword. The word spread like wildfire through the Pacific Fleet. Every torpedo officer, every chief petty officer in every submarine started tinkering. They weren't using my specific carbide drill bit fix. That would have been too obvious, too traceable. But they were doing the same thing, disabling the complex, buckling BUORD mechanisms, fabricating their own, simpler, more reliable firing pins from whatever hardened steel they could scrounge, from the tips of screwdrivers, from tool bits, from anything that would shatter and detonate on impact. They were bypassing the official detonators, and in doing so, they were finally giving the U.S. submarine fleet the teeth it desperately needed. Suddenly, the impossible became possible. The duds disappeared. The hit rate skyrocketed. The Japanese merchant fleet, which had been suffering from accidental damage, began to evaporate. Their destroyers, which had once been so effective, were now being sunk by submarines whose torpedoes actually worked. The war in the Pacific turned on the strength of a secret, fleet-wide, unauthorized invention. My invention. The insane fix. The small, ugly carbide dart that proved a simple truth. Sometimes to win a war, you don't need a genius in a lab. You just need a desperate man, a welding torch, and the courage to break every single rule.